In today's video, we're going to talk about what I believe is one of the most powerful methods for fundamental life change.
Today's guest is Andrew VANHOFF. He's a photographer, and on YouTube, he talks a lot about spirituality and self-development and helps people understand themselves a little bit better, including myself, and that's how I actually got in touch with him.
Where does the voice of that inner critic come from? That you're not good enough, you suck, oh, what are you doing there? You're not good enough for that person, oh, you could never do that, don't try. Where do those feelings of shame and unworthiness come from?
Oh yeah, I can record it. Yeah.
The Zoom lady was very full disclosure. She's like, no.
Gotta make sure.
But it came as like a side with this photographer's, branded backpack thing I bought. So full disclosure, I didn't take, but the rest of them are mine.
The rest are yours. Yeah, those look amazing. Like I didn't know that you were a photographer in the beginning because I just saw your videos on YouTube, and then I looked on your Instagram and I was like, damn, this guy takes amazing pictures.
Like, is this the same guy?
Yeah, is this the same guy?
So in the long run, my kind of hope and plan for the YouTube thing is to I want to combine what I do with the kind of content I make, and then kind of mix in more travel, like outdoorsy stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Have we officially started yet?
Yeah,
Maybe
pretty much. Yeah. I just to keep roll with it, as we go on. Yeah.
So yeah, just kind of, if you ever watched Yes Theory has some really cool kind of concept of like blending that kind of personal interest, like travel thing, with the pushing yourself and kind of breaking through boundaries and all that. Yeah. There's some overlap, so it's that's my interest, I think.
Okay, yeah, nice. And I know Yes Theory pretty well. Like they've been like a big part of my life growing up because of just like their message and seeking discomfort, right? Like that was their biggest message. And throughout my life, I've noticed that the people who choose to seek that discomfort tend to be like the most happiest and the most peaceful because they're not bound by these limitations that they place in their mind and choose to overcome them continuously. They're not just stuck in this one position.
It's weird because it's like, it's the same thing with making my videos, right? It's because it's like there's like conceptual understanding, but then it comes to you in your own life and you're like, man, I still gotta I still gotta psych myself up. You're like, yes, I agree, and I know all these things.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then you're like, why aren't I doing these? Like, gotta get back on the train.
Exactly. That's like the toughest part is like you could scroll through all this social media, like all these quotes, watching all your videos. Yeah, get all hyped up. And then once it's time to do it, that there's like this little voice in your mind that says, do like, you're not good enough. Do anything else. Yeah. All these hundreds of excuses when all you need to do is put the focus on what you want. And I saw a recent video of yours talking, I don't know the exact title, but it said you explained that sometimes we put a brake on ourselves, like we're trying to put our energy towards what we want, and then we break that momentum. And if you want to explain it better
so essentially the analogy I use is kind of the self-sabotage concept, but the idea being that like when you're self-sabotaging, not only are you like putting yourself backward, but you're using more energy. It's not like you're just standing still because you're trying to like, part of you is like, I want to go do all these things. I want to move forward in life. I want to do whatever. But perhaps like the more subconscious patterns in your mind or your conditioning or whatever, there's those anxieties and fears and those kind of, like you talked about, the excuses that come up and you're like, what if I, but of course you still have that half of you that's like, wants to move forward, everybody I think
those
has
two
that
sides,
kind of
like
fragmented dichotomy going on, and you end up using way more energy because you're like, you can't commit wholeheartedly. I had a part in that video. I cut it out in the editing, but I went on a little tangent talking about flow states, and I don't know, but if you think of like the concept of a flow state, somebody is so like immersed with an activity that you kind of dissolve like the barriers of yourself. Like they just become part of whatever they're doing.
You're just so focused on it. that it
and
becomes like one process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a good example of like the complete lack of any, personally imposed resistance, right? You're just being at one with the not that that's obvious, like, and that's why people, pursue flow states, right? That's why you have the people who do all these crazy things or athletic tasks or whatever, because it puts them in that zone where they're just like free of their own resistance. Part of me, I wonder if that's what like what some Buddhist monk who has enlightenment or something, like if that's their experience of just everything is a flow state. They have no imposed resistance from that like voice in the back of your mind saying, well, what.
Yeah.
And that in so many instances, it's like life doesn't necessarily need to block us. We're like, I'm gonna stay back here because I don't know about all these things that might happen.
Yeah, and we become used to that, like that voice. For me personally, like we get used to hearing that voice so much that we tend to take those limited actions. Like even though we want to take massive action, and we know that it's okay to fail, it's okay to make mistakes. Like that's one side that says it's okay to do 100%. All those things, and then there's that small part of you or big part of you that tries to protect you in some way, and it's like a constant battle, pretty much, of trying to push. But then I realized recently, like it's much easier to notice that idea, notice that part of yourself, and detach from it instead of fighting it, instead of like trying to overcome it with even more thoughts, even more energy. Like try to understand what it is. Like, why am I thinking this way? And you'll tend to find like a bigger answer of something that was pulling you back. And I know in that video you said that you used the example of rocks, right? Like, so rocks that you're hanging onto. And I thought that was a good analogy for it, because some rocks are like bigger than others, and some are heavier for us, and some are lighter, and some are easier to get out of, and some are take less time. But that those rocks, as long as we continue to be aware of them and detach from them, then I think we'll constantly grow as individuals.
I agree. It's I think in so many of the videos, at least the topics that I've talked about, it's like awareness of your own thought process is so important, because I know for a lot of my life, and I imagine for a lot of most people's lives, as long as you're like under the surface of all this stuff, you're just like caught up in the insanity. You
it's
don't
like
really
being under a current or a wave. Yeah.
And you kind of, when you finally have some event or whatever might happen to wake you up kind of to the fact that you're like, oh, like this is going on. It can be scary and like overwhelming, because at first you're like, oh damn, like I got all this stuff going on that I didn't previously know was even part. I just thought this was life, and now I realize that like, no, I'm just like putting all of these limitations. So much of it is in your own head. A scary amount, frankly.
A scary amount, yeah. It's like when you're a child, you don't really understand all these things you're taking on, all these experiences, all these negative emotions, and you try to deal with it in whatever way you know how, but really those emotions get kind of repressed. And it's not until you get a little older and you start to understand more about yourself that there's a different way of viewing the same event. There's a different way of handling all this that's going on within me.
And I think like that ability to acknowledge that so much of our interpretation of the past is just that.
Just that, yeah.
it's just our like the past. It's really, it's kind of strange when you get into like how we conceptualize reality versus reality. Because it's like, technically speaking, there is no past, right? There's just infinite. Like, so all we have is like the story we tell ourselves about
what
who
happened.
I am,
Yeah.
even definitely what happened, and then how that incorporates into my structure of viewing myself, like who I am and my concept of, but even your concept of self, strangely, almost entirely exists in the past because you like have to think of all the things you've done.
Yeah.
But by the nature of thought, you're automatically thinking about the things that you can't have that concept of self really in the present except
Without
for
an idea, really. Like it's that's something I learned from Alan Watts. He said like let go of all these concepts and ideas, because really that's not reality itself. Like words, every word is like made up. We made up everything that like, we're talking about.
I was thinking about the other day. I was like, the concept of like a bear walking across like the Canadian and United States border, right?
Yeah.
And as a human, we would say like, well, that bear doesn't know that there's a border there.
Exactly.
But there is no border there.
Yeah.
The border is a human construct that only exists because it's an idea that is shared by enough people that we're like, yeah, that's real.
Exactly. Like every word is that way. Like the you saying that this is a black shirt, like the only reason we understand and we think that this is a black shirt is because everybody agrees that the word black is this.
It's like it's like the thought form is present enough that we're like, yeah, it's close enough to being a good word. It'll work. But when you get into like applying that to yourself, I think it's very interesting because we can develop those kinds of complexes where we have, issues about our self-worth or I'm bad at that or whatever. And they can be very crippling, like real thought and feeling that you mull in and just get overwhelmed by. And it's like the same thing as the black shirt, it's just all these layers of like stacked ideas on top of each other. So I've always thought it's interesting how you can be like outside on like a gorgeous day and you're miserable. Like everything, you're just in your head, like, you're grumbling. But what's actually happening right now is like complete difference from what's going on in your inner state.
Yeah,
but
there's nothing that's even there's nothing bad that's ever happening. Yeah. But in your own mind, you've made up either some story that's in the future or some story in the past, and it's pulling you in that direction. Yeah. But really, it's a beautiful day. Just look around.
And it's just so it's so strange. And I mean, I know that I have had plenty of days like that myself, where I've been, not
Same.
to say that whoever's listening is like, oh, you're bad. No. Trust me, that's everybody. But it's just so weird to like, when you're able to kind of pull yourself back a little bit and be like outside, nothing is wrong. Like it's actually, it's objectively nice out. Like it's a good day. But
it's
inside,
really like just accepting.
All,
exactly. I think for me personally, I've realized this recently it's accepting whatever is happening and letting it be that way, instead of trying to trying to control what you can't control.
Yeah.
In a big way. That is,
I think, for me, one of the most important lessons that I have learned. This kind of YouTube and personal development phase of my life has been, I don't know, maybe just over 2 years of kind of since I had like my first like, you got to do something different with your life, bro, kind of moment.
Yeah.
And not, of course, without setbacks. Like, it's like anything, right? You kind of have your good days, and then you have your days where you're like, you kind of still get caught up in those thought forms and that kind of past.
Exactly. If you don't mind sharing, what was the thing or the event that made you want to change? Like what?
No, not at all. So I was working at a restaurant and worked there for initially. So photography has been my thing for a long time. Got my first camera when I was like 17 or 18. I was sort of interested in it before then, and then I was like, I started watching, like old fashioned like OG Casey Neistat like daily vlogs on YouTube. Yeah. And I was like, man, like this is gonna be my thing. Like, I want to travel, I want to take photos, I want to do video, and but I was like, I have no money, so I
have this idea, this dream, but no money. Yeah.
And I was like, I got job. What could I do? I had a 2-year college degree, so nothing like crazy, just like a generic, associate's degree. And I was like, all right, well, limited like work experience. I'd worked at a mall for a couple of years. I was, restaurant, food industry. I get tips. Like, this is how I can make the most money. And then started working my way up at this restaurant. And then 2020, I had a trip to Thailand planned with 3 coworkers. We're going to go for 3 weeks. And then, everything in 2020 went out the way it did.
We know what happened in 2020.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you're allowed to say the words on YouTube yet without getting demonetized. But so that kind of put me in a state of limbo that I was somewhat I didn't like it, but I think, if I'm being honest, it also allowed me a convenient excuse to like fall back on not pushing through inner insecurity, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, I have, the whole world shut down, can't do anything anyway.
Everyone else isn't doing anything.
Yeah. So it's instead, you have like let off the pressure. And I was like, I just kind of I was like, all right, I work at this restaurant now. And, that became my life. And I had some moments in that restaurant where, so I started as like a host, you work your way up to a server, and very, very busy restaurant. I worked at a Red Robin. It was actually the busiest Red Robin in the company.
Really? Damn.
Yeah, for like 2 or 3 years in a row. I don't know why, given the location, but it doesn't matter. It was really busy and insane. And it was fun, but this is like during those COVID years, I decided that I did not want to be a server, because I was like, this is just too stressful, too overwhelming. Don't like this.
Probably not getting paid enough.
Yeah, right. Well, so that was, I had all my inner like, this isn't worth it, whatever. Yeah. It's too overwhelming, too stressful. So I went back to, they had like food runners where you made pretty decent money doing this, but not quite as much. And looking back, I can see how even that was like, that's inner dialogue superimposed upon reality. I'm like, I want to make sure everybody's happy. I had like a people-pleasing complex, I think, and trying to balance, the needs of all these restaurant goers. If you did not have a perfect experience at Red Robin, I was like, oh no, I didn't do good enough. So once again, that, inner dialogue is really the only reason I'm like, I'm not going to do the hardest thing. But fast forward to, I guess it would have been like 2021, like the summer of 2021. So like going on a year and a half of lockdown type like restrictions and everything. And I finished reading Atomic Habits, which I had started reading. The one good thing from COVID for me was I started working out about 3 or 4 times a week at home, just because I was like, there's freaking nothing else to do.
There's nothing else. I know, when the gym closed over here, I was like, what am I going to do with my life? Like I was going to the gym like I think 4 or 5 times a week at that time. And when it closed, I was like, what do I do? Like, I don't know what to do.
So I had never been like super physically active in my life. And for the first like month of lockdown, I sat at my computer and I played old school RuneScape. And then but I working in the restaurant, I'd had a very active, like, you are constantly on your feet all day, and I went from that to like sitting 12 hours a day, basically 24 hours a day.
Laying down I took like 8 hours.
I took like a month off of work before I went. So during that month, I gained like 8 pounds, and up till then, my weight had like entirely been the same. So I was like, oh my God, like I can gain weight. This is what? But that spurred within me. So I had started reading Atomic Habits, and I read like the first chapter, and it's like, you got to just adopt an identity by doing stuff over and over. And I was like, all right, so I'm going to start working out. And I just only ever read the first chapter, but I did build the habit of working out, which has lasted me like 3 years. So
that's a good habit right there. That's a pivotal
I guess
habit.
if you're only going to read one chapter of Atomic Habits, as long as you implement, you're good. I read the rest of the book, and he talks a lot about, I don't know if you probably read Atomic Habits.
I read probably like half of it. I still need to
there
finish
you go.
it.
That's enough to get some stuff down.
Exactly. Yeah.
But one of the key kind of ideas is he talks about like our actions are a vote for your identity, or at least the way we build our self-concept stems from, I think
experience.
It's the history thing once again, that we're like, I did that, therefore I am that kind of thing, which might inherently be a flawed mechanism in our brain if you actually break it down, but for the sake of habit and routine building, you can use it.
For good habits, it's actually a good thing.
Exactly.
As long as it's good, but it works in the opposite direction as well. If you start eating junk 100%. Food and stuff, that's going to implement in your life.
100%. Because you see, that was one of the interesting things about, I'll put a pin in that. We'll go back to it later. Just the interesting limitations you see other people express about themselves. But so anyway, fast forward to the end of 2021 or the middle of 2021, and I finished reading Atomic Habits, and it made me really reconsider the fear-based approach I had been taking towards, or like avoidance-based approach I had been taking towards that restaurant work. And I was like, I'm going to be a server again. I was like, so I went up to my bosses and I was like, yo, I want to, and thank you to them. They were very supportive. I was always doing like a good, I think partially because I was obsessed with never letting anybody down and always being a people pleaser. You're really good at your job. You're just not happy at the same time, but everybody else loves you because you're constantly trying to keep them happy.
Fulfilling everyone else's needs by your own.
Exactly. Yeah. They're like, yeah, great. Go for it, man. We'll let you do it. But so that was like started a kind of inner revolution where I was like, working on like changing those identity habits, started reading a bunch of books, and that led to a relationship with a coworker who I'd known for a few years, and we started going out. And that, I think, part of like the confidence boost of working out and all this stuff, and like having the win under my belt of like, I just faced like this fear that had been holding me back for a year, and that kind of, that opens your eyes to a little bit more opportunity. And then you're like, oh, why did I not see this opportunity before?
Exactly.
And then that cascaded into a breakup, which is the catalyst for all the personal change you ever need in your life. Because, man, you want to know about your own insecurities. Relationships will bust that too, wide open for you.
They'll do it.
And so it ended up being like a 6 or 7 month long relationship, and that ended just about the start of 2022. And I was left feeling very like shattered, and going back to how we create those kind of dialogues, past or future. I had been on the improvement track, and I'm reading all these books, and I'm like, I could do this and this and this, and it seems like opportunities are opening up, and then lo and behold, I meet this girl. Well, I knew, but we get together, and she loves to travel, works at an airport, so we get like flight benefits. You can fly for free, and we're like talking about in the future we can go here and here and here and here, and so your future-based mind starts building this.
Your life
hypothetical, exactly. Oh, this is gonna end. This and this and this and this, and all of that came crumbling down, and that revealed within myself a lot of inner insecurity, where I had been, and I started. I don't know if you've ever like read about attachment styles or anything like that.
Not particularly. No.
So basic theory is like, I don't know if it's pseudoscience-y, but there's quite a few books on it. But the idea being like people have different methodology of how they interact in relationships. A lot of it's based on, I like everything, you know, our limiting beliefs and things that happen to us in our childhood. And I would characterize my own behavior, at least in the past, as more of what you would call an anxiously attached person. So the person who's like, you know, always instantly texts back, like wants to spend more time together, gets the core fear, I suppose you would say, of like an anxious attached person is abandonment generally, or, you know, not being abandoned because you're not good enough kind of thing. Like they're going to see through me, and that can manifest in a lot of people pleasing and all that, because you're always trying to compensate.
Yeah. Always trying to prove yourself in some way and doing the best you can always. Yeah,
exactly. And being a little too perfect, you know, like not you're like, oh, we never argue around here, because if we argued, that might chase you away. Kind of like I'll let you win to avoid any conflict. And that revealed within myself all of these things. And then the other one is there's a like a spectrum, but generally it's going to be either anxious or avoidant. And avoidant are the people who, you know, when people get a little too close, they feel like, oh, this is dangerous. Like I got to create some distance, and they might have like trust issues. Sometimes it's also like an abandonment fear, but it's more like if I let this person in, then they'll abandon me. So I have to distance. Whereas the anxious is like, I have to do anything to make sure this person doesn't leave me. It's weird because it can be like different adaptations to the same root.
Yeah. I think the same root kind of feeling. Yeah. The root feeling of, either staying with that person, or I don't want to get too close with that person. And it's like you said, relationships definitely like they get to you in the places where, especially if you're aware while you're in them. Like there have been times where I've been in relationships where I'm like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking of this? Of this person this way? And it's really just like an idea, an expectation that I'm attached to of them. Yes, and that's not real. That's not who they are. I'm attached to this idea I have.
So freaking and not You know who Jay Krishnamurti is?
I recently started listening to him probably like in May. So like very, very recently.
I've been reading a few of his book. Well, his books are just I think they're just transcriptions of some of his speeches.
Talks.
But, because he talks a lot about how book knowledge is not the best thing to learn from, which is funny considering I'm reading his book. But anyway, but that's one of the things he talks about, is just like the idea that for people to have a true relationship, they can't be constantly interacting with the ideals we're projecting, like the future or the past. I'm saying you're going to be this way, or I need this, or I want this, or I would rather, we just have to like be here and occupy the same space with like no expectations. And
exactly, because I think everyone, no matter what, you'll always have an idea. Like, or you might have an idea of me, I might have an idea of you, but that's really just our perspective of each other and not the real thing.
It's
and
like the black shirt all over again.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
it's our label. We're like, I understand what a tree is. Yeah. But if that is not a tree, like if I go outside and touch the thing, that is not the word or my concept. It is an entirely different
thing.
But that in relationships, that causes, I would say, basically every relationship problem you see plaguing our society, which is that people have very unrealistic expectations, for one thing. I think I put a lot of pressure. I probably hit the gas too hard for my own, in hindsight. I was like head over heels for this girl like 6 months into a relationship, and but in hindsight, I'm like, was I? But it was more like I was head over heels for my own fantasy of what my life was going to look like with this girl, you know? Yeah.
In relationship with her, like in relationship with you as like the forefront of it, and not really her. Like she's there.
She's like, this is going to make my life so great. And, I didn't have that presence of mind at the time to even think through, but in hindsight, I'm like, that's fucked up.
That is fucked up. Yeah.
That's kind of messed up but we all do that so much, like go into relationships and have this expectation. But anyway, so that falling apart revealed to me my own insecurity. And as much as I was like head over heels and kind of shattered at the end of this relationship, there was the logical part of my brain, which was like, bro, this was a 6-month relationship. You should not be in this much pain. Like what is, and that feeling of like, this makes no sense, like led me to, well, why do I feel like dive deeper into this a little bit? Like so that was part of my saving grace. That and the fact that
that instead of running away from that pain or like trying to distract yourself, you decide to go into it and see like, why is this happening?
And I don't know why that was my impulse. So I'm very thankful that it was, because I could have easily. I think that was partially spawned by the fact that I'd had that kind of earlier in the year like confidence boost. I was like making forward momentum. I'm like, I'm gonna go do these things. I'm gonna push myself, and that encouraged me to break out of that kind of past like cower in my in my
build up all the walls possible.
So when all of a sudden that whole like sense of everything was destroyed, I was like, that was weird. like that was really uncomfortable and I hated it. But also like part of me is like, why did that I want to understand this more. So I started reading books, started watching a bunch of YouTube videos, and I was also I also lucked out that there's a YouTuber, he's kind of like a self-help new age spirituality YouTuber guy named Aaron Doughty.
I haven't heard of him, but I'll check him out.
He's okay. I think his content's really good. Some of his older stuff is kind of clickbaity, but that's okay, because that clickbaitiness is what got me into his YouTube videos. It was like, how to get your ex back or whatever.
Oh, okay. So
like, as I was on a desperate, but he talked a lot about like concept of detachment, right? Or the concept of like the energy we bring to, how energy would like repel or attract people based on your own energy, sense of self, and kind of and he talks a lot about like law of attraction stuff, which I have mixed feelings on, but I'm like but he also for not to shit talk him, he does a good job of, I think, balancing it, because there's a lot of law of attraction content on YouTube, which is like, if you just think about it, everything will be fine. And he's like, put the action in attraction, man. Like you gotta be the thing, not just think about, you get what you're a reflection of what you are, not necessarily like thoughts help, having positive thinking. But I had somebody, I think it was after I made my video about letting go, sent me a message, and he was talking about how after following this kind of like law of attraction, think a better thought thing. He was feeling like thought shaming himself, because you're still, it's hard to like not have, because
you'll still have the negative thoughts no matter what. Like those will come up, just like as you learn more about yourself, you realize that thought is its own thing. Like you can never stop that thing.
It's just going on.
Yeah, it's just gonna go. Like it's you're not the one that's doing the thinking. Something is there that's doing it.
And I think that is where my content has kind of crossed over, as I've kind of come to more terms with that kind of line of inquiry, reaching into like the Alan Watts or the Krishnamurti. Differentiate even one of my favorite, Michael Singer, who wrote The Untethered Soul.
Oh yeah. Like all these people, like I recently started understanding what they were saying. Like I've been listening to Alan Watts since like probably 2016 or something, and I didn't get it until like this year. Like I didn't get it until this year. Like I was like, oh, this is what he was talking about, being in the present, so that you're not attached to any of these thoughts. Like I didn't get any of what he was saying.
Yeah.
It just sparked in me one day that, oh, that's what he meant.
It's one of those things. It's like you have those realizations of like, oh yeah, but it's really, and I've had a few of those while reading J. Krishnamurti. I've also read some Ramana Maharshi, who is a like Hindu guy from the early 1900s.
Okay.
But his whole thing is like, you know, find the true self, kind of differentiating you from the ego construction of you, which is that
basically
kind of
just
bundle of
ideas
thoughts
you
and
have.
ideas. Yeah. And we're like, I'm that over and over again. And his thing is like, well, how could you be something that you contain, you know, like you're like, well, how would that work? Like, how could your sense of self is something that you know you can change.
Yeah.
Like, how could that inherently be you?
Yeah. Alan Watts said something similar. He said, like, how could you eat your own mouth?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. He says, like, feel your own fingertip with itself or something like that, you know?
It's impossible. And so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's just that is such a different mindset to how the regular world conditions you to behave, I think. But it feels more intrinsically true to me, you know? Like you reach out, you're like, oh yeah. That
exactly.
Kind of,
like the world, and I think the society, I think would teach this, but most people just don't know it, right? Like most people just don't have this information. And I don't know what made me like go on YouTube and start like looking up this stuff. I don't know where that desire came from, but I've always been interested in learning more about myself. And if I had a fear, I would never run from it. I would just go into it and ask all these questions. And I was always curious. And who knows if I don't think that's just me, but maybe for some people it might be harder. They might distract themselves more. But I was always the person that never ran away from those fears, and it benefits me in a lot of ways. But one of the key concepts I tried to remember is like no fear is real, really. Like it's all
true. It's just literally all in your head.
It's all in your head. Yeah, like it's something we make up, like something that's imaginary, and you could either choose to put energy into that or choose to put energy into something else. Like it's your choice of where you put it, you know? That's
another one of those things that like conceptualizing, because I would say I have had fear be a restricting factor, not maybe fear that I recognized as such, but just more like avoidance of, because I wouldn't have conceptualized myself as being afraid of the past, even though now looking back, I would say, yeah, you were afraid, bro. But at the time, you know, I was just like, well, you come up with your compensation stories, you know, you're like, oh, well, I'm not cut out for it, or that wouldn't work, or this or that, or it's all like a disguise, so I have a convenient excuse to not have to try.
Exactly. Everything, like every fear and every like negative feeling just wants you to be comfortable, like wants you to, all right, you've done the same thing for the past 5 years, just do the same thing, just continue to do the same thing.
Like, what if we did this forever? And so that has been, I would say, one of the biggest things in my life that is not that has kept me back, but that I have kept myself back as a reaction to. I got to own that, you know? So even when I, got my first camera and was like, I want to travel and, do photography, I never really pushed it. It's more like, this is a pipe dream kind of thing. But I had so much inner insecurity, partially related to that, keep everybody happy, that underlying feeling of like, intrinsically, I don't know, somehow what I do is not going to be as good as what everybody else does. And I grew up, I have great parents, but my family that I grew up with, extended family, amazing people, all of them, very brainy, very intellectual, very like incredibly intelligent people. And there was a lot of like, oh, did you get good grade? You know, not like judgment, but like excitement and like, oh, reward. Like, oh, look at Andrew was so smart. He said this or what. And I think as like a little child that crystallized into like, I just need to get all the right answers all the time.
Yeah.
As like a core life thing. And which lasted, you know, till I went to college. And dude, I was, in hindsight, this is just, I guess, one of those examples of like how you don't you recognize things later and you're like, this was a clear example of me expressing these patterns of belief. Yeah. But I would have like borderline mental breakdown at the start of like a new college quarter, because I'd be like, I'd read the syllabus of my classes and I'd freak out. I'm like looking at the last page. I'm like, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
And like learning went out the window. It was like, get the, you know, you got to get good, get good grades. And I could tell you, even now, my 2-year cumulative GPA was like a 3.98, maybe 9.7.
That's amazing.
And I took like, you know, 15, 20 classes, probably, not actually more probably. And the only 2 classes I could tell you off the top of my head are the ones that I did not get a perfect grade because I remembered those and resented them. And I could give you the excuse that I gave myself and repeated over and over and over as to why I got those grades wrong and why it wasn't my fault. And so in hindsight, looking back at
hard. You were extremely hard on yourself.
Yeah, looking back at that, you're like, well, maybe that's a sign that you got like some clinging to this ideal scenario issues going on, bro, in your mind somewhere. But at the time I was, you know, you're living in that reality. You don't really have, that's why I'm thankful it's that, getting back to that, you know, the relationship ending, that really snapped me out of like, I had the potential future built, and the fact that like disintegrated gave me cause to reevaluate, because I was like, I hadn't been particularly happy at the restaurant, and I'd started to feel like, you know, now I'm just putting in the days for the sake of it. I don't really have anything I'm pursuing. I'd had coworkers who, it's one of those jobs, it's kind of not a good work environment when you think about it, because it's one of those jobs where everybody just always talks about how much they hate the job. Like you bond over how miserable you are.
Thank God it's Friday. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Except Friday was my Monday, because I worked 3 double shifts on the weekends. So I'd go in for Friday for like Friday, Saturday, Sunday for like 12 hours.
Wow.
But the you know, that was kind of the overarching mindset. And you look around, you're like, do I want to be like these people? And like the most happy and focused of my coworkers were the ones who were like, this is their side job and they're in school. They're pursuing something to them. And I like looked at my own life and I was like, what happened to your thing? You know, like, why are you not, why have you just,
what do I really want?
At the time I was like 25 and I'm like, why have I, you know, I am 25 years old. Like, why have I given up on my future just to work at a burger joint?
Exactly. You realize that in the moment, like I'm not really doing what my heart tells me to do. Maybe I've lost like the direction in my life, and I had to get this lost to finally find myself again.
I think there's something to that. The idea that like people, if you're comfortable enough that it's not miserable, you know, you don't attempt to break free. But when that final straw is on your back, you're like, I gotta change, you know, you're rock bottom or whatever. I gotta change everything. And then that relationship ending kind of prompted my own inner journey. I'd wanted to travel for a long time, but partially because of fear, I was like, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. But I decided I'd saved up a bunch of money because over COVID, I'd been living with family and just, you know, I wasn't doing much other than working. And so stocked away, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to take some time off work. I'm going to do some travel. So I went to the Azores, which are Portuguese islands off the coast of Europe. They're kind of like European Hawaii.
Oh, really?
which
So-
is
I know there's like those
One of
those mountain regions. Oh, one of
This
those.
one.
Yeah. Yeah, I know there's I forget what it's called. There's like an island near Portugal. It starts with an M. I forgot what
Madeira.
Madeira. Yeah. I heard a lot would that. It's,
I want to go there. I've met people who have been there, and they would slap me for saying Madeira instead of Madeira.
Madeira. Yeah.
But they're like, no, you gotta say it right. But gorgeous. That's like the Azores are a little bit more. I don't know. They're a little less describable. They're very. They're like New Zealand met Hawaii. Like a lot of rounded green hills, but also volcanic craters everywhere. Madeira, very rocky, gorgeous coastline, like big mountains.
Big mountains. Yeah. But that picture looks amazing. That.
Oh yeah. Well,
you took that one.
Yeah. All but the blue one. That one is
one. Yeah.
Alex Stroll, who's a photographer favorite of mine. He's got like 2 million Instagram followers. He's like an OG Instagram photographer from back in the original Instagram days.
I know, when you were only allowed to post pictures, I think, like
square.
Yeah, square. Yeah.
Only pictures and only square. Yeah. So that became a kind of gateway, that trip, and then I went to Iceland as well.
Iceland was probably amazing.
Iceland was sick. Both required me to kind of break out of my comfort zone. Obviously, like solo travel internationally was a big step for, scared Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
And
was that the first time you left the country as well?
That was not the first time I left the country. I went to Israel with my dad in 2019, 18 maybe. My dad is like he's complicated to describe what he does, but he basically teaches he has a degree in ancient Near Eastern religion, and he teaches like biblical Hebrew and Greek because he knows all these old languages. And he was invited to give a paper at a university in Jerusalem. He's like, you want to go? I was like, of course I want to go.
Yeah.
So I'd been
anywhere.
Exactly. That was when I was like desperate for travel. And so that bled into me going and kind of having that first international solo experience, staying in a hostel. And then I slept mostly in Iceland. I slept in a Subaru. I
rented a car.
Subaru Forester with a mattress in the back and drove around. That was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But very different because when I was in the island I was on with Sal Miguel, but always surrounded by people. Like I came to realize in that moment that solo travel, you're basically never alone if you're staying in like a hostel. Like if you're, I don't know, maybe I'm a social butterfly. I think that's part of my like perfectionism. Don't hurt me. Like conditioning is like, I'll make friends with everybody.
Yeah.
Then they'll like me.
So you weren't alone on those trips.
No, but Iceland, I was very much that was a good, because that was 10 days, and that was just me. I had days where I would like go, times where I'd go like 2 days without talking to anybody.
You're like looking in the mirror, like, can I still talk again?
Yeah, exactly. But that was a good eye opener. And then I came back and I made my first couple YouTube videos, which are basically just me traveling to Portugal and Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
And because that had always been something I'd wanted to do, but had that insecurity about, that feeling of like, who's going to watch? I'm not going to make good enough stuff. Like all my inner blah, blah, blah,
yeah,
blah. Yeah. And I found a journal that I had written when I was like 18. And here I am at the time, I just turned 26. And the goals were like the same, when I was like, I have not made very much progress in the last many years. And
were they about travel?
So it was like travel, make YouTube videos, do photography, travel more. And here I was like staring down kind of basically the same goals, not having really made too much progress. And not to say, I think in a way, life teaches you lessons in its own time. You
Yeah.
kind of go through. I would not say that it was a waste of time, but it was just a good like snap back to like, let's focus in on doing some of this stuff and making
life
some videos.
sometimes puts you on a detour just to make you realize how much more you want the actual thing. Like do you really want it? And it'll take you, and you might get lost in that for a while. Some people it's shorter, some people it's longer, but then your heart always tells you, this is where I want to go. Yeah.
And that kind of whole affair was like a catalyst for me to like be like, oh yeah, I gotta like refocus. And then that led into me kind of made a few travel videos and then started making a few talking head videos where I was like exploring some of the concepts that had been impactful on me as part of this whole, transformative thing.
Were you nervous in the beginning? Like
that's where you find me. Yeah.
Were you nervous making that first video? Like putting yourself in front of the camera? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I was the travel one. So I did a few practice because I bought a GoPro. So my first couple videos are on a GoPro. And I would practice. I would walk because intentionally I was like, I gotta desensitize myself to like be doing this in public around people.
Yeah.
So I would walk around the block with a GoPro on a selfie stick, like talking to,
just to get used to it.
Yeah. Just and I would like I did not release any of the videos, but I would talk about some of the stuff that I've talked like books I've read or this or that. The kind of similar but much less structured than the videos I've made more recently.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to kind of get used to that. Because that that inner perfectionist is like, you're gonna do what in front of crowds of people? You're gonna like,
and then you're like, this person's judging me, that person's saying this. Yeah,
for real. And that was good practice to just get used to like being in front of a camera, talking into it. And so I did that. I don't know. I think I did like every day for like a week or two. That was just leading up to my trip because I was like, I want to be able to like record when I'm on this trip without feeling like, all of that inner.
Exactly. I asked you that because I personally like went through that starting when I started the podcast. Like that first episode, you could see it in my face. Like I was frightened.
Yeah, I bet, man.
I wasn't as comfortable as I am now because I didn't have the reps. I've never done anything like this. I've never been on camera, never seen myself on video. And so like,
it's distracting at first. You're like, do I have something in my, you're like, and you're like, where do I look? What do I,
exactly. And then
you look at the camera,
and with podcasting, you're like, is this how I sound? Like, are people like actually hearing me like this? This is, So you go through all these thoughts and it's really insecurities like that are just you haven't been aware of. And once you become aware of it, you're like, why am I holding on to this idea that I have of myself? Or why do I feel like it's not enough? It's not like I'm not worthy enough, It's
so funny you say holding on to that idea of yourself. It's so funny. I would be like, I can't do this. And then you're like, well, why don't you change that? You're like, because I can't. I want to hold on to my inability to do this thing. And then you're like, bro, like what? That's all in your head.
Yeah,
like, I know, but I'm used to it.
I'm used to it. It's comfortable.
I don't want to put it down.
Yeah.
So like that's kind of pillow. How I ended up here. How did you end up here?
I like starting the podcast, or like when I was, I'd say like, I don't know, 15 years old. I knew that I had to do something in my life that would make me happy, right? Like sure. I looked at the world at that time, like a 15-year-old kid, freshman year in high school. And I was like, everybody else is doing the same thing pretty much. Like go to school, get a job, retire, have a family, all that stuff. And I was like, is that really what I want? Like, what do I want? For the first time in my life, I asked myself that question, right? Like, what do I personally want out of life? And so at that time, I didn't know. I didn't know like what that was. I didn't know what my purpose was. I didn't know what kind of direction I wanted to go in. But I'd say like every day for 6 months, I would ask myself that question, like every day, like until I got an answer. Like every fucking day, I would just like keep on asking myself. And then one day I was like sitting in my room at my desk, and like I think what was it? This was actually. I'm mixing up the story real quick. This was a little bit later. I'd say my senior year of high school, I took a graphic design class, and I didn't know anything about Photoshop, but I started that class and I was like, I love this. I love being able to create anything I want. And at the same time, I started listening to a very famous podcaster named Joe Rogan when he first started.
Never heard of it. No.
Yeah. So I started listening to one of his episodes, like randomly on YouTube, on those recommendations.
Sure,
I clicked one of his videos, like 3 hours long. I'm like, what the fuck is 3 hours long? Like,
yeah, exactly.
I was like, this better be interesting. And I watched the whole thing, and I fell in love with it, and kept on listening. I was like, what is this? I didn't even know what a podcast was. Like, people talking, like, what is this, radio, on-demand radio? I'm like,
Basically,
yeah, exactly. And so I started listening to that, and I found interest in graphic design and being creative in all these different elements, and video editing. And I had the epiphany, like, why don't I start my own? Right? Like, why don't I start my own podcast? Like that just hit me, because for so long I've been listening to people like, you probably heard of Gary Vaynerchuk, right?
Yeah.
Gary V. Yeah. So his main message a lot of the times is to go out and execute on that idea, go out and make things happen. Right. Yeah. And I'd be listening to that as a 16-year-old, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know. Like, I want to do something, but I don't know what it is to do. And I finally had that idea. And for the first time, I felt it in my heart. Like nothing else ever felt like that. Like everything else was like kind of, sort of, but that one idea, like I felt it like deep in my spirit. Like, you have to do this. And so that was like my senior year of high school. And that, in like, I'd say 3 months after that, like the summer of going into my freshman year of college, I was like, I have to do it. And this is when I have the time. This is when I started it that July or whatever. And it's been amazing ever since. Like it's brought me so much joy, so much like self enlightenment too. Like I didn't realize who I'm more proud of who I became in the journey rather than just doing it. Right. Like the goal was to do it. Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Like, the goal was to do it. The goal was to get better at it. But who I became, I'm much more proud of. Like that, the person I've become, because I had to go through all those fears. I had to go through messing up and failing so many times and being bad at it first, right? Like anytime you start something, you're fucking, you suck at that shit. Like you're not going to be good. And you want the results, you want to get better, but you realize that takes time, that takes discipline and consistency. And you learn those things on that journey. And I wouldn't change a thing. Like everything I went through, it has brought me to where I'm at. And it's been an amazing journey so far. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think that's that's something I hear more and more from like the people who like who maybe haven't like made it, who are still working on stuff, but like the people, like you say, you wouldn't change a thing. Like, and I think that is a sign of like making good, you've done good inner work. If you can reach the point where you're like, I don't know if I would change anything. Because looking back at like that relationship, for example, old Andrew would have been like, no, anything but this falling apart. Like this must, like, if you'd given me a list of like things I could lose to keep that, would have been you would give up everything else, but not that. Yeah. But now I'm like, man, like I am so grateful that fell apart. Like, because it breaks open. So the ability, I think, to have that peace of mind to be like, I'm, even though, like you say, you had to suck at it, you had to go through the process of putting in the
Yeah.
reps, you had to go through the days where it's like you didn't want to do it, you like
Exactly.
Like,
yeah. A lot of things happen and you make excuses, but that kind of builds you up in a way. Like it's the stepping stones. And if you don't go through those hard times and suffer, right? Like they're in life, you're going to have these hardships and battles, but in my opinion, it only forges you. It only makes you stronger. And if we didn't have it,
say, right?
Yeah,
you gotta hit a sword with a hammer a few times before it's done being forged.
Exactly. And if we didn't have that, like I wouldn't see myself, like I couldn't imagine myself, I couldn't imagine me being this way if I didn't go through it.
Yeah. No, I think I would say the same. So nice. And then along the way, I'm sure it must be an amazing opportunity to have just like say insightful conversations, like pick up something here, there, and there, and just meet people. I'm sure it's been an enlightening experience from that perspective.
Yeah, it has. Like I didn't know how I was gonna do it, like how I was gonna get guests or anything. Like I was like, let me just start a podcast, right? Like that was my idea, and I just like kept focusing on. For me, like the purpose for the podcast was always to bring positivity and like just help people and inspire people in a way. And through that goal of wanting to give that to others, I've learned so much. I've been able to absorb all these conversations and expand myself. And the reason I talk about all this stuff, the reason I have you on it is because I need this as much as everyone else needs it, right? Like
so secretly, that's the reason I make my videos.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's part of it, right? It's like everybody's out there just doing their best, basically trying to figure out how to make it work. And I think that aspect of like you say, being able to give. It sounds cheesy. I'm doing it to give back, but like, it genuinely does shift the focus a little bit. Like whenever it's I guess going back to the flow state thing. It's like whenever I'm focused on like, I've got to make a video. I've got to think about this. It's like, what do I want to talk about? How can I do this? And then your self-sabotage kicks in. But it's like, what can I share? What can I do to help somebody else? Takes the focus off of like me being me focused. What are Andrew's problems in this video? Oh, how is this going to help me? Blah, 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 blah. You just get stuck in that, like, what is my little me fit rather than focusing on like, what can I bring value? Can I help people? And I've had moments where it's like, I've read comments where I've like teared up a little bit, where it's like people have shared, this, oh, I got this amazing thing and I was in a rough place, and I'm like, really? Like,
you realize that other people go through things as well. Like that's something that I've realized or gone through as well. Like other people sharing comments of this episode or this comment or this quote changed my life. I'm like, I was just sharing it. Like I just
so cool.
like this stuff. Yeah. And to see that like fuels you as well. Like it makes you want to get better. It makes you want to improve yourself and continue to share this gift or share these videos to people, because it makes you feel good. Like in a weird way, like that's worth everything. Like that feeling is worth everything.
I think that's what, even it's funny. You can like see those common threads throughout different kind of like areas of our culture, where you have like people talk about having a purpose, even if that's like people who are super like you're like Giga Chad memes on TikTok or whatever, who are like ultra business, your Sigma males who are like maybe a little too purpose driven. You can see like the extent where you're like, well, that might be a little up. But like balance is good sometimes. But that does strike at like the core, where it's like people have that desire to have something to work on that is greater than themselves. And I think you can only really reach true heights of being able to actually share things with the world if you focus on something that is not just you.
Yeah.
Because it sounds weird because it's like you want to be slightly self-centered to like be balanced enough to be like, I'm good. You want to be, if people say don't be full of yourself, I think you should be full of yourself. You should be just enough full of yourself where you're
Just
like,
enough, yeah.
because if I feel empty in here, then I'm like trying to grab all this external, how could I make it about me?
Then
But
you
if
need
I
you need their affirmation for you to feel good, but that's never gonna fulfill you because you'll never have enough affirmation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's tricky because it's like you want to have that self-love where you're like, I'm good. Then you can enter that like self-abandonment almost of like the flow state where you can pour yourself into some creative pursuit or something that gives back. And then it becomes about, because you don't need anything out of it. You know, it's like you don't have to fulfill it for your own personal. It's not about me. It's about like, what can I do? How can I provide? And that, I think, getting back to that very first question you asked, you know, the self-sabotage, like, I think that having some kind of greater purpose outside of just yourself can be a good way to take the brakes off a little bit. Because when you're focused so much on like, how's this going to help me? What can I do about my life? Like, what's this podcast going to do for me? Like,
exactly.
It changes the dynamic and it makes you much more self-conscious, like much more micromanaging your own stuff rather than focusing on the greater picture.
Yeah. And other people notice that too. Like people can sense that about you when you're not doing it for yourself. People tend to like you more and in a weird way, you get the things you want more often, you know?
That's the weird. So that's what, that was the very first thing that got me into this whole thing, was the guy talking about like detached and they will attach in relationships, you know, like, and he's like, problem is if you're going around with this energy of like, I need you, you're chasing everything away. But if your energy is like, I'm good, people are like, I want some of that, you know, because that resonates with, in our society, it's rare for people to have that calm, like presence of just like, I'm chilling. Like I'm totally happy to meet you, but I am not dependent upon the outcome of this encounter for my well-being psychologically.
Exactly.
And having that balance really is, I think, a big part of like what allows you to be more, because then you can, you know, pour yourself into the conversation
without getting lost in someone else. Like you could be in love. You could be completely in love with whoever, but you know that that's not all there is.
Yeah.
You're not, if that goes away or if that changes, your value of yourself is always full no matter what happens. If you fail a million times, if everything goes wrong, you lose all your money, you lose your house, you lose everything, your value of yourself is still at 100%. It's always there. Yeah. And that's like, it's a really hard thing to do. It's easier said than done, but like it's a process, because it's a process. We do have that. Maybe process might be the wrong word, but as long as we are dwelling in that realm of like past conception of self, right? Then it's challenging, because we do have a lot of conditioning in our culture has an interest in telling you that you're not good enough and you should be afraid, and I'm going to sell you all the solutions to those problems. Like, don't worry, you're not attractive enough, but with these Levi jeans, you could be. You could be,
So we have that thing where it's like we all want to move up this social hierarchy and have higher, you know, value in the eyes of our peers. But we conflate that, and then we start balancing our sense of inner self-worth with like, what does, you know, John Everyman think about me?
That idea that someone else has of you becomes your idea of you.
Yeah.
And
that's so common. Like that's so implicit. Like it's almost not even questioned. Like the fact that shunning exists as a punishment and that is very effective and, and destroys people really goes to show that like part of it, I think it's just our nature. Like it's good to have a supporting structure and a supporting family, and all of these things are great. But as long as you are continually externalized that like this is your source of well-being, performing, constantly measuring your performance based on did that person smile or did that person frown or like, why didn't they wave back at me? You do and then you turn it into a back scratch because you're like they don't return the wave. You're like, oh shit,
somebody behind you.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, you didn't. Anyway, that inner voice of like, oh, you screwed that up, but it's like constantly attempting to use infinite data to like synthesize a cohesive self to like reinforce itself.
Yeah,
as like so that's what they talk about. Like the ego is exists as an idea structure, and then the reason so many of us have busy minds, have a hard time like shutting our brains off, is our brains have essentially been trained by us to like, all right, well I'm gonna need you to like constantly monitor everything that could possibly ever go wrong.
Constantly analyze analyze the like not just the world but like ourselves and how we fit in everything. It seems like like the worst possible thing you could do. Like that's what it seems like. No, it does.
You would have, and it has like, it's good for very select things. Like our we do have a decent ability to forecast things into the future, which other animals do not. So it's it's not without its benefits at all. But like, it's so funny because we talk like humans, like we're like our rational thinking is so often very irrational. Like I'm gonna rationally think this out. Lists like every worst case scenario arranged. Like, what if something good happens? Well, that wouldn't be. That's not realistic.
That's not real. Yeah, you can list everything wrong, but nothing good.
Yeah, and it's all just a project. The very fact that like two people can experience the same event and have vastly different interpretation.
Goes to show like it's in the perceiver. It's in the perception.
And there's like that momentary perception, interpretation, like identification, maybe, where it's like if you can stop it at perception, just things happen. Things are always happening. Things will have always happened and continue to happen. It's funny. I was thinking about this the other day because I made some video in the intro. I talked about how like we live in chaotic times, right? And then I was thinking about that sentence and I was like, do we? Yeah. Is there more stuff happening now than there? Like, how do I quantify that? It's
exactly.
There's more things are happening now than did 100 years ago. Like, there's more now than there was then.
Yeah, and there could be like some guy living in a tribe somewhere that's living so peacefully. Like, he thinks it's perfect, right? Like, it's not nothing's chaotic to him. So it's all. And I think it's all perception.
Yeah. It's just coming to terms with how our perception is being filtered through those. A lot of the time, those past lenses, those past labels of, if I have a label in my brain that says tree, when I look at a tree, I don't see the thing. I see the some knowledge that I learned, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
In some little letter book for the letter T as a tree, and I accumulated all these. But that keeps us in so many cases, I think, from really being able to engage with reality, where it's like all of your mental limitations, all of your fears, unless they're like there's Peter Crone. I don't know if you know who he is.
I've heard of him, but I don't think I know his work. No,
he's on some podcasts you should listen to. He's got some good ideas. But one of his quotes, I think he said, if it's not life-threatening, it's only ego-threatening.
That's a good one.
And it's a good measuring stick whenever you're afraid of something, because you're like, you feel fear, you feel resistance, you feel really anything other than like peace.
Yeah.
And you're like, it's just ego. It's just that bundle of thoughts and self-concept is being threatened by what it perceives by a story it is telling itself. It's
Exactly.
it's like I've told myself. Oh,
once you're aware of that, like it loses all of its power. Like there's no foundation to fear.
Yeah.
Like the second you question it, it loses everything because there was nothing there in the first place. It was only there because you were afraid to look at it in the first
Alan
place.
Watts who says there's really nowhere to stand or something like that. You can't. There's no ego to. You can't. It's not a firm. It's not a. It's just kind of dissolves.
Yeah.
It's really when you get into like that kind of branching of like psychology and spirituality, I guess, in a way where it's like, what is the nature of man? That's where I get into like, how do I express this in a 10-minute YouTube video? But it's just interesting to like see. I see in myself, and it can be frustrating at times because I can see in myself the continuation of patterns where I'm like, I'm still doing it. Like I know that I have a tendency to be a perfectionist about things.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, why could I do that task? And, I record little like pitches to send out to companies saying, hire me for photography, please. And I had to do I was in a pinch. I was like running late for something and I recorded 5 of them in like 6 minutes. And I was like, why did that take me an hour yesterday? Like what about this being in a pinch was like, good enough. It'll work.
Yeah.
And you realize you're like, wow, this stuff that unless we question it and have the presence of mind to be constantly like
aware.
Why did I do that?
Yeah.
But that's why this is another, I think it's I'm pretty sure Peter Crone, once again, same guy, was said something about like how life will set you free. And Michael Singer, the Untethered Soul guy, also said something. Life will provide you with the opportunities. It's like you don't necessarily need to go out. And this is a video I'm making a thumbnail for right now, but it's going to be released very soon. Is the idea that there's so much like self-improvement, but like what the implication behind self-improvement is that I am not good enough now and need to do something to presumably make myself good enough.
And that really, that's just like a never ending prophecy.
Yeah, exactly. Right? It's just a loop where, and I think that a lot of our culture feeds into that because it fits that mold of like, I'll sell you the Levi's jeans. I'll sell you a Coca-Cola or some antidepressants or whatever, because you are still one step below whole and you could be there. You're real close, but just this one last thing and that feeds into that mindset of like, I'm not quite there. There's something off. And people end up on that treadmill where we're just trying to get that one next thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that once again, if you have that inner wholeness, that inner like, then of course, like there's a lot of self-improvement stuff that is very beneficial for your quality of life and it's very healthy for your body and everything. But it's like if you go to the gym with the mentality that this is what's going to make me good, I'm doing this then you end up with the people who either are like hurting themselves, like ego lifting at the gym or have like body dysmorphia, they're like anorexic and they're trying to, or bulimic or just so many of these things where people have such intense focus on like, I need this to be perfect. My body is the thing that defines me now.
Yeah. They have some type of identification and that's their whole purpose. Like that's their whole reason for being is that idea. And
it's like this sustains my self-worth. So I have to maintain this at all. And I think that the self-improvement thing, because it's interesting because meditation is one that meditation has become commoditized.
Yeah.
Is that a word? Turned into a commodity.
Yeah.
That like there's like transcendental meditation where, you know, they
There are
have
different apps and stuff too.
Hollywood
Yeah.
celebrities who are like, you meditate 20 minutes a day and you repeat a mantra, which is a sacred word in Sanskrit, which your guru gives you for $500 or something. And not that that's not a helpful mind clearing exercise. Like, it can be a perfect, there's nothing wrong with it, but to pursue it as like, this is what you're missing, you know, this is the thing, you just need to journal, you just need to meditate, whatever. I think that can perpetuate,
Like, instead of adding things, learn to subtract. Like,
yeah,
do it for just doing it. Like, don't do
Absolutely.
it for any reason. Just do it because you want to. Or
yeah, I mean, getting back to the, you know, your podcast, right? Like, it's something you wanted to create, and then when you are allowed to dedicate yourself to it instead of dedicating the podcast to yourself, like it's a function of how can I? It's just part of the whole experience, but it's doesn't have to be something that fills up the hole in yourself.
Yeah. It feels like you're like how it felt was I was being like taken to do this thing. Like, I was giving to it instead of like, I need this for me. Like, and even like I recently started a clothing company called Be Change, and it's all about like changing yourself and constantly growing and improving. And I think I started it last summer, and those 3 months of like designing and like making the website, it felt like I wasn't even here. Like, it was like something was
just so in
like a complete flow state for 3 months. Like, it was insane. Yeah.
And it's cool. It's interesting how when you're able to take yourself, your ego, at least, those limitations out of the way, it's like you don't need necessarily, like, going back to the, you know, you don't need to hit up the gas harder, really.
Yeah.
You need to like lay off the things that are keeping you from hitting, because so many people, the reason they aren't happy in life has to do primarily with, it's like, I want to be somewhere else, I want to be doing something else, I want to be, you know, I'm not happy with my relationship, I'm not happy with my health, but all of these are technically solvable problems. You know, like, firstly, we could question whether these are actually the root cause of your unhappiness, but assuming we're decided that they are, there's like all those limitations. So this is, we put a pin in this way back when I started working out, I had a couple of coworkers who were like in their maybe early 40s, late 30s. I remember one guy in particular was like, he's like, oh man, I wish I could, you know, lose weight or gain muscle as fast as you could. And you would see people, you see them expressing their inner limitations. You like see him.
He just said it out loud.
Yeah. And I'm like, dude, I've seen what you eat for lunch, man. Like, stop, you know, it's just part of the sacrifice of like doing the things that lead to but the inner judgment or the inner habit or like inertia, you know, we just keep doing what we've been doing.
The inner story that you tell yourself keeps you in that same place. And when you see somebody else do it, you're like, oh, they could do it, but I can't do it.
Yeah. And it's very, and so I think that's part of why they talk about when you go through like big transformations, sometimes, you know, people in your life will like get angry at you or like you know, resent you a little bit. And I think it's because it's that life presents us, once again, if we're willing to see them, opportunities within ourselves to be like, why does this bother me? Like, why, you know, if my friend is suddenly massively successful, I feel insecure. Why? Like, that's like, you're on the surface, you know, you're like, yeah, great, good for you, man. But then part of you's like, man, why couldn't it have been me? And then you got to look, that is an opportunity to like pick into your own mindset and like take out some stuff that doesn't need to be there anymore and really investigate those things without having to go out and pursue like improving yourself. It's more like, to speak to what you said, it's more about taking away the stuff that doesn't need to be there. It's not like, what can I add to me to perfect the mixture? Because that's like the sneaky way of your ego being like, well, let's negotiate. Like the ego's like, well, I'm gonna stick around, but like we'll make some concessions so that
exactly.
like
it wants more things and more ways to identify itself with. But I think people talk a lot about like ego death. That's probably like a big topic. And to me, I don't think you could like ever kill that. Like you can't. The thoughts and ideas and the concepts you have of yourself will always be there. It's just being aware and understanding that it has its place. But I am more than that. I am always just the awareness of that. And that's not who I really am. That's been probably the biggest click for me is anytime I have those ideas, it might pull me in a spiral and sometimes I go into these negative emotions.
And then you gotta like, oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't last like a week. It doesn't last months. I'm now like much more aware of those feelings and those ideas that I instantly realize what it is and learn from it. Like I'm more appreciative of the fear. I'm more appreciative of all these things. Like I'm glad the universe brought me into this space so I could learn more about myself, like that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. That's what, and like we were talking about earlier, the desire to just be, not the desire, but like being grateful for where you're at and like the progress and the process of being you and experiencing that. Yeah. I remember like there was a long time where I don't remember what made me think of this. A couple months ago, I had this thought. I don't remember what made it occur to me then, but I'm pretty sure I remember like some coworkers talking about how they would, which celebrity they would trade lives with, or like if you could trade lives with this person or whatever. Yeah. And people were like, yeah, I'd do that. I'd sign up for that. And I reached a point within myself where I was like, I don't think I would do that. Like even though those people might be more successful, or even like they might be more free from their own limitations, like they might be further ahead on their journey. It seems so short-sighted to me to be like, with the more, I guess, broadened awareness that I have developed, to like why would you try and trade lives with somebody? Like it seems like a misprioritization of like all the things that you should hold as important. Like you are on your journey through life and you have the ability to grow and develop as the person, but we're so hyper focused as like a society on success and money. It's like, I'd do anything to be a billionaire. And then you like look at billionaires, and I'm sure there's plenty of perfectly nice billionaires, but a lot of them are very depressed, miserable people.
Because like sometimes I like put myself there. Like imagine if I did have it, right? Like imagine you had everything. Imagine you had all the stuff you wanted, all the money, all the houses, cars,
you're
relationships.
Still just stuck in here with your
it's there. Like it's you might have some sort of pleasure from driving a nice car for like maybe a day, but that's not going to last a year. That's not going to last 10 years. So it's being like the happiness and peace we seek is only found right now. It's no amount of money, no amount of anything is going to make that like happen in our lives. It's within. And that realization really clicked it for me. Like, not to say that, money, we shouldn't go for money. Like, yes, money is
there's nothing wrong with,
nothing wrong with money.
Like,
yeah, exactly. But you could have all these things, but understand that that's not where the happiness is. It's not in money. It's not in relationships. It's not in any of these external objects.
Yeah. And I've never been uber wealthy, but I would say that at the point where I had the most money in my life and a relationship was right before that ended and it all fell apart, I was not happy. Like, and like, even with, and as much as I had bought into the future of like, it's going to be great and I need this relationship and it's going to be all perfect. the present me was still going through the motions and being like, I hate this, today sucks, I'm miserable, I'm unhappy.
Yeah.
And so even though it's funny how the brain works. It falls apart and I'm like, I want that back. And then you're like, why? Like, did you really? Or is it just like so familiar that you can cling to it that you're like, this is what. But even when I had the relationship and the more money than I'd ever had, it didn't do shit to fill the inner feeling of like, I need more, because
it's infinite. It's infinite. Like there's no amount that will be suitable, because you ask a billionaire that's, unhappy, you have everything, you have the cars, you have houses, all this. Why are you unhappy? It's the same reason. It doesn't matter how much money it is. It doesn't matter how much anything is. It's within your own being of, like it'll always be one step ahead until you realize there's no steps. It's just, I'm here. Like, this is it. Okay.
That's why I said earlier that I'm not sure progress is a good word to like making progress towards, you're like it's like you're either in it or you're not kind of thing. I don't know. It's like taking the steps towards being here now. It's kind of funny. You're like, I'm going to work my way up to now. I don't know how that's going to work exactly, but no, it's funny because it's like the Alan Watts thing. So much of this knowledge is like watered down and spread. I don't even necessarily mean watered down in a bad way, but just like spread through posts you'll see on like an Instagram or Facebook or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels so common that it's like cliche. You're like, whatever. And if you encounter it at that point in your life where you're already just kind of jaded, like I know there's things I'll read now that I'll consider and I'll be like, oh yeah. And I know if I had read that like 5 years ago, I would have been like, that's bullshit. Like what is this like fluffy, airy fairy? Like, oh yeah, head in the clouds, man, get real.
Work hard.
And realizing that like my perception of reality had to shift in a way to like open up that intense like lockdown view on me, like being in here. And like, whoa, all right, man, like let's back it up a little bit. And I think part of that is like that, that expanded awareness you talk about, the ego, when you're living entirely in that state of like being your body and your thoughts and your mind, you don't differentiate. I am my thoughts. So
there's no escape.
You're just you're fucked, right? Like until somebody or something happens to like snap you out of it, it's very challenging, I think. And so I guess you have to have a lot of compassion for the people who don't see things though from that perspective, because it's like I understand, I've been there, I still have days where that's the way it is. But you look at our world and it's just interesting when you have that perspective. Like you look at I think it's funny to look at like politics, because you see a whole bunch of people who are all saying like, I'm gonna fix the world. And then so many of them have either side of the aisle family lives that are in shambles, like their personal lives are like wrecked with scandals. Like they are not happy, fulfilled people, but they're like, hold on, bro, no, I'll take care of you though. You're like, I can't manage these 5 people in any harmony, but give me 350 million or $1 billion. We'll be peachy. Like I know what to do in that. And you're like, really? Though? Like maybe you should, I don't know, like find some inner peace or something and like work on that immediate circle. But maybe the people who have that internal, they don't have that drive to go,
the desire to
become winning politicians.
Exactly. Like that's, to me as a kid, you look at the president and you're like, oh, that's probably a great thing to do. And then when you get older, you're like, I would never want to be president.
Well, it just seems like it's so I mean, especially, America in the last 2 election cycles or whatever has become just a media circus about everything, and everything's all like sensationalized and like how can we make everybody as mad as possible. Like
like that's gonna help. I mean, it's
right. And so
nothing.
you end up with people who are so divided that, but once again, it's like we give people an excuse or an outlet for those inner feelings, and we're like, how can I blame this on anything in my environment that's convenient? And that's the way that really any kind of group identity works. Almost not not maybe that it's all quite that malicious, but like, we are a people like this, and we feel uncomfortable because of these reasons. Instead of wondering why I have all these fears and insecurities and diving into that, I'm just gonna be like, it's your fault. Like, that guy is the one.
Feeling is caused by the thing and not by them perceiving and being aware of it's their own analyzing it and process that they have within themselves that's causing that feeling towards that. Because really, nothing is nothing is good or bad. Nothing makes us happy or sad. Like it's just how we internalize it, and everyone internalizes things differently. And it's interesting that it's like there are. It sounds so horrible to say nothing is good or bad, but it's like nothing is like things just are. Like they just happen. Yeah. And we are superimposed judgment, and you're like, how could you say that so and so wasn't evil? And you're like, well, it might have been, but the things they did, it's still just what it is. It's what
just,
it is. Yeah.
And not to say we shouldn't try to stop things, like, but the inability to accept what is forms so much of that, or like desire to control what is, not just because we have the preconception. We have this block of like, oh, it needs to be this, and it's not right now. And then we freak out at the disparity between the now and our conception of what the now should be. It's very strange.
Yeah, I think there's a cool story that I heard. I forget who it's by, but this person asked this monk and somewhere who said that everything is perfect. Everything in the universe is perfect. Yeah. And he said, if everything's perfect, then are the people starving around the world, are they perfect? And he said yes. And he said yes because so is your desire to help them. That too is perfect.
Oh, there you go. That's good.
So
that's a good way. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I like that.
In order for there to be, like, there has to be problems, and for you to have the desire to solve them, right? There has to be like that balance of two opposites, and that makes you realize like perfect is not just good. Perfect is everything. It's not neither good or bad. It's just everything. And I don't think we even have a word for that in the everything.
100%
isn't a good way to describe it, really.
That and looking at those, those limiting beliefs that hold us back, so much of that is we have that judgment of, I should have done this different, or I shouldn't be this way, or we should, like, according to somebody, I don't know. We don't really think it that far ahead. We're just like, I shouldn't do that, or that shouldn't, or just should. And that somewhat arbitrary list of limitations gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you're pretty much paralyzed. You narrow yourself into like, and then even then, most people, it's funny because I guess some of their shoulds maybe become can'ts. Their shoulds crystallize into like can'ts, and then they start to feel other shoulds, and then they become uncomfortable. So you have people who are like in the job they hate, but they've worked there for 10 years and they have no plans on changing anything.
But they keep
like,
on complaining about it.
If you talk to them, they're like, I should do something else. They even have that voice, like even then, their story has beaten them down to where they're like, I can't do that, should have, shouldn't, but they found like this one path, and then there's like this nagging, like, you should try, you should do something else. And then that nagging has to compete with the can'ts, and that becomes their like their battle, which then they will, if you ever ask somebody, they'll justify very, very ardently. They will defend. They're like, well, this happened and that happened, and so this, and then I couldn't do it and I had to give up, and instead of viewing them as like setbacks or events to learn from, not to say everybody, but some people certainly, that becomes crystallized as like a life sentence. Like, this is just the way things are now, and this is the way things are going to be in perpetuity, I guess.
Yeah, and you literally die right there. Like it's your soul basically cannot function in that small space. Like, it needs room to grow.
Yeah.
And if you just say that this is who I am and I'm not going to change, I'm not going to step outside my comfort zone, then you are a walking corpse in that moment.
It's so strange. It's funny because I think there. You ever read any of the books of Robert Greene?
I know. Is it the 48 Powers of Law or
48 Laws of Power?
48 Laws of Power. Yeah.
He's got his books are very interesting. He's got some good talks on YouTube. He's a very I feel like his books make him seem very manipulative and Machiavellian. Like yes, but if you actually listen to him talk, like, or see a video with him, he's very soft spoken. Seems like just kind of a quirky, nice guy. But he talks about the book he's working on next is, I think it's going to be called like The Law of the Sublime, but like the sublime feeling of being human, being like when you consider what it actually is to be alive versus the tendency we have to be hyper focused, not just on ourselves, but like on a micro dose of like what we are doing in this situation, how that interacts, and how's this going to affect me, and how's this, and that screws with our sense of time and like change. Because change, you say, people say, oh, I'm not going to change. This is just the way I am. But it's like the nature of life is everything is literally constantly, like, since we've been having this conversation, like millions of, if not billions of cells in our bodies have died, and new ones have been born. Like, we are fundamentally not the same creatures that we were when we started. And the fact that we are talking right now is through some crazy, ridiculous technology and me talking into my phone on a tripod, which is just some lenses, and we're like hundreds of miles away from each other. And it's
somehow
just
we're here.
So bizarre that the nature of reality is what it is. So the book he's talking about, talks about like the nature of humans on scale of massive things, and like your cells, and how, and that to me, I think helps me like be like, oh yeah, like remember how cool it is to be alive. Like, how cool is it that there's gravity for some fucking reason and we don't fly off into space? Like, how cool is it that atoms have positive and negative charges that are balanced enough that we don't collapse into each other? Because matter, for some reason, can be solid and repel itself. Like, that's awful convenient. There's just, but we take for granted these literally like infinite systems that have to exist and work perfectly just for us to even have the thought that I'm screwed up. Yeah. And like then we're sitting around like, oh, everything sucks, I hate this is miserable, while standing on the shoulders of like literal infinity. It's so bizarre.
It's bizarre. Yeah. It's only when you put it into that perspective that you realize, like, damn, it's bigger than I could imagine, and I'm a part of it. Like I'm part of this, whatever it is. I don't know.
Whatever the hell it is. We're all here doing our own. I think it's Ram Dass. I don't know if you're familiar with Ram Dass.
Yeah. I recently watched a few of his videos. Yeah.
He tells a good story. He's got a good speaking cadence and all that. He's fun to listen to. But he talks about the awareness of like becoming aware of like the fact that you're like a being in a meat suit kind of thing. Yeah. And then like, how did you get into that one? Like, he's like, I'm in here. Are you in there?
Exactly.
Weird. Like that's just crazy, man.
Yeah, his concept of like I think he was the one who I heard say, like, we all say this word I, right? Like I'm wearing this shirt, or I'm wearing these shoes, and you say that I'm wearing those earbuds, and like, what's this I? Like, it's the same I. It's the same, like, we're talking about the same person. It only for our own perception convinces us that it's two different people, but really the same thing that's looking out of my eyes is the same thing that's looking out of your eyes, and it's the same thing that everything else is made up of. And
it's just very strange.
It is strange, yeah.
But you start talking like that to Joe Schmo, who's very focused on that eye, you know, and they're like, you got to get off the psychedelics, bro. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like you gotta. What are you talking about? Get a job. You know. So it's just interesting the way those like the consciousness interacts with, or at least observes the mind and its many eccentricities, and identifies. That's I talked about. I mentioned Ramana Maharshi, the Hindu guy from like the 1900s. Early 1900s. His whole thing is like get to the nature of the self by he's like the who am I guy. So it's like you have the thought of like, oh, I'm afraid of that. He's like, who's afraid of that? He's like, I am. He's like, find that. And then you like go inward and you're like, where is it? You're like, where is that?
There's nothing there. Yeah.
You're like, that eye is kind of what? So his thought is like, that's, you know, the way to kind of that spiritual awakening is like,
because it takes you to nothing. Like, it takes you to like, there's nothing there. Like if you go deep enough, you can't, like we said, we can't look at yourself. You can't like bite your own, or you can't eat your own mouth. Like you go to a certain place where there's no idea left. And then what? And then then that gets you to a place where you realize, I'm none of these thoughts. I'm none of these ideas, concepts, beliefs. And it's not that the point of it is not to like give those up or transform them in any sort of way. It's to just be aware that that's not who you are.
Yeah. Just have that extra distance to be like,
that distance. Yeah.
Oh, you know, because it takes it from being like, oh God, no, to being like, that's interesting. Like, you know, you're
exactly
that. It's just being alive's a trip, man.
It's a trip.
It's an interesting. When you actually think about it, that's the crazy thing to me. Is like looking at the nature of reality. You're like, so many things you just take for granted all the time, and you're like, this is fucking weird. Like this stuff doesn't.
I know. And it's crazy, like how humans, like I don't know if any other animal perceives this much, like as us. Like why are we so self-conscious? Like it doesn't seem like any other animal does this. Every other animal seems to just go about life and live in the present moment and just do their thing.
Yeah.
But for us,
what is it they say? The start of the Bible, right? Where you get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. You get kicked out of paradise when you learn the knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah.
maybe that's just your judgments, right? You're when we start being like, good, bad, I gotta do this, I can't do that. We kick ourselves out of the paradise.
The paradise,
right? You get yeeted because you're like, you start doing it in your own head. I don't know. Or maybe that's just something we project onto old stories. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. A lot of things I don't know.
There's that whole like, is the world religion true, or do I just pick the bits and pieces that I like and be like, I can see some of that. I can see some of that. And I'll like leave out 98% and be like, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. But it's so that's, you know, it's, I think coming to terms with that, like that, if we were to wrap up this whole episode in one neat little bow, I think looking at those, becoming aware of those limitations and then realizing that those limitations are just self-imposed based on your preconceptions and things that have happened in the past, and sometimes things you want to happen in the future, but also to realize that the things you want to happen in the future are a projection of the things, like even the future is a projection of your past. Yeah. Because obviously future hasn't happened. You're just like, I didn't like this and I did like that, so therefore I might like this. And that becomes our entire projection. But freeing yourself from that allows you to take that foot off the brake and see, for one thing, see much more clearly, because you're like, oh, I'm not, like, you put some of those rocks down, you know?
You're not somewhere else. Like really where the present moment, they say, is the only moment there is. Yeah. And it's true, because
we're always trying to be somewhere else.
There is no such thing as the past or future, because you're only thinking of the past now, and thinking of the future now. Like it's like an idea, it's a concept that you're using your energy now to fulfill, really.
Yeah. It's very interesting. But yeah, we use the energy now. That's very well said, to perpetuate that concept of like the weight of like who I am, everything that's ever happened to me. If you look at the current moment, you are like absolute freedom, like literal infinite possibility.
Exactly.
Like nothing affecting you. You could go, like, if you had amnesia right now, you could live a life that is like like opposite direction of everything that has been in your entire existence up till now. But it's that self-concept of like, gotta do this, gotta do that, gotta do this, and that becomes the weight that then starts to smother us. And I think it's interesting because it's like we have a lot of problems with like anxiety, depression, and like suicide in our country, and people who kill themselves like they're trying to kill the weight, you know. They're like it's so tragic in a way that it's like it is that not necessarily realizing, and obviously it's not easy to realize, and you know, even to those of us who are on this journey, there's certainly days where that weight catches up to you, you know. And you got to like remind, like, oh yeah, okay, like but that desire to like put that burden down can only be done by kind of recognizing what it is. And but in finding that freedom, you're like, all right, I'm here. Like I literally could functionally limitless possibility, like within the bounds of, I guess I can't fly because I'm a human, but like, you know,
but it kind of feels like that way. You get like lighter when you're in that state. I feel lighter in my body and lighter in everything I do. It just feels like life's moving and I'm not resisting any part of life. Yeah.
And I think that's what to work towards, you know, is to try to find that awareness and use those moments in life where stuff does trigger you, where you get upset, to realize within yourself, the Michael Singer, the Untethered Soul guy, calls them samskaras, which are like basically like emotional mental patterns, like blockages that are stored up inside of you. And so when stuff hits something inside of you, it's not the thing that's bothering you, it's your reaction to a thing. You know, the reason that breakup hurt me so much was all of my inner stories about like, I'm lonely and I can't do things on my own and I'm afraid to go travel, and then this person fits my projection, and it's like what actually happened is like two people went like this, you know, like like that's real, that's what happened, but the story becomes this smothering, terrifying nightmare.
The idea is more powerful than the reality of it.
And so like learning to just become, like you say, aware of that and take that foot slowly off the brake allows you so much more freedom, on the other hand, to pour yourself into the things that feel more true to you, like feel more like this is something I can give myself to, that's not for me per se. Like it is a little bit, but it's not like for my ego to be fulfilled. It's like, how can I give back in a way that is unique to me?
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, did I say that right?
I think so. Yeah, I think like words can barely do it justice. Like there's so many times I've listened to the same thing and didn't get it, and then finally I'm like, oh, it was that realization within myself that I don't even know how to describe it, like, but I just kind of got it, you know. I think that's part, just because, like you say, you have to find it. You have to find it within you. Don't worry too much about the methods or the following so and so's practice or the steps or whatever, because that's another addition. Like that's another
like
thing.
Gotta, exactly.
Like one more thing. One more thing. We got to watch one more video, then I'll be at peace.
Just
or whatever.
Your ego, like, oh no, we're good, bro. Like I'm gonna build up another layer. Now you're pretty zen, so you can feel better about yourself now.
Man, thank you, bro, for coming
Yeah,
on.
man.
Thanks
for having me.
This has been amazing. I don't know how long we've been doing this. I think 2 hours now.
I think 2 hours. Yeah.
Man, the time just flew by.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome. I got to go work on stuff. Otherwise, I'd like to stay and talk more. But no, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you reaching out, dude. Yeah, man.
Of course, man.
Best of luck. Stay in touch.
Yeah, I will. And I'm glad we were able to do this because I recently found your videos and it helped. Some of your videos like helped me so much that I was like, I have to reach out to you because I would love to share this information with more people.
No,
So
I appreciate it. It's been cool. It's like I said earlier, it's me it's working through my own process and discovering stuff and being like, oh, I can, this was very useful to me. I'm sure there's somebody else out there who needs this kind of thing. And it's been really cool. I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I want to meld, like I said at the beginning, kind of meld that with some more travel stuff, get some more outdoorsy, and then meet cool people, have cool conversations, and I don't know, meet cool people, do cool stuff. That's life aspirations right there.
Yeah. All right, man. Appreciate you again. And, hopefully everybody watching, listening also enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure I definitely did. Just being in the present. Like when I'm doing this, I try not to think about anything. And that's what allows me to get like so focused in this. And, it was a joy throughout, man. I appreciate you.
I agree, man. It was a fun time. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, we will for sure. All right, man. Have a good one.
Take care, dude.
Take care.